Hello, my name is Joe Cartwright and welcome to my studio. In today's demonstration I'm going to give you 6 tips that will help you add depth in your painting. After that I'm going to combine these 6 tips into a quick little landscape painting for you. Before we start, if you like my videos and you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, can you please do so, because it will help me out a lot with YouTube and it doesn't cost you anything. So let's begin. In this example I'm going to show you how similar objects that are further away are softer edged or less distinct than objects in the foreground. So let's just very quickly paint a blue sky. Bring that down to the horizon. And we'll paint some trees in the distance. I'm not trying to turn this into anything special, I'm just trying to show you the effect of space and how to add distance to our painting by having similar objects in the distance that are softer edged. And we'll just paint a very basic ground. Now when you're creating softer edges like this, this is a wet on wet stage. Okay, so you're not going to create soft edges by painting onto dry paper. So effectively I've wet the sky portion with paint, and before that dried I went in and dropped in these softer edge trees. Now going to dry that. These trees in the distance are quite soft edged, as you can see. Now if I want a tree to come forward, instead of soft edges I'll use harder edges. And you can see straight away how this tree appears much closer to the viewer. Obviously it's an all optical illusion because it's all on a flat piece of paper. Let's put another one over here. Put another one here. These aren't meant to be proper paintings, they're just little exercises So you can see how sharper edged objects appear to come forward. In this example, I'm going to be showing you the impact of tone upon that feeling of distance. We'll start with the sky. Now, if you look at the sky, you'll see that it's darker in tone up above, and the further away it gets from you, it gets lighter and lighter. So we'll start with this mix. Now I'll start adding some water to the mix and diluting it. A bit more water. More water. And just more water directly to the brush. Paint around these buildings. Don't have to be too accurate about this, this is just an exercise. And then for the ground, I'll just mix some raw umber. Add a little bit of cobalt turquoise to give it a greenish tinge. Not critical. Now for the sky, we started with our darkest tone up above and then diluted that mixture. For the ground, we're going to start with our darkest tone. I'll drag some over here and dip my brush into that. And now I've created a weaker mix. I could have also just dipped my brush into the water. Make that a bit lighter still. Now we'll go into a darker mix. And I can darken it even further. So again, you can see the grass in the distance is lighter in tone than the grass in the foreground, and that's already giving us this feeling of depth in our painting. I'll dry that and then we can do the buildings. Just going to mix a light grey for these buildings. Just some cobalt blue and burnt sienna will do for that. Let's give it a hint of a rusty roof. Now this one's closer to us, it will be stronger in tone again. And you can see how this building already looks closer to us relative to this lighter one in the distance. Now here we see three buildings, closest, furthest one and the distant one. Stronger tone, lighter still. The same would apply if I added some grass. Let's have some grass in the distance. And then as we come forward, it gets stronger in tone. It also gets bigger, but I'll discuss that in a separate example. Just lighten them a little bit. There you can see how distant grass is lighter in tone, getting stronger in tone, and getting stronger again. The colours you use will have an impact on where objects appear in your picture plane. Similar objects, like the hills, will appear bluer in the distance and warmer coloured in the foreground. The same with the trees. Distant trees will look cooler than the foreground ones. The grass in the distance will look cooler than the grass in the foreground. Just going to mix a bit of cobalt blue for the sky. And for the ground, I'll mix a green with some raw umber, a bit of aureolin. Obviously, the colour of the grass is going to vary depending on the time of the year and the location. Sometimes it's more brown grass, other times it's greener, and then different types of grass will have a different colour. For this exercise, I'm just going to create a semi-bright green that's a little bit dull. I just use some raw umber, aureolin and cobalt turquoise for that. Quickly paint the sky. And I'll run this down to the ground level. So the first thing you'll notice, I've let this bead of blue paint form at the base. So it's fairly light. So now what happens if I go in to paint the grass, when I touch that blue, two things happen. Some of that blue will mix with the green of the grass and add a slightly bluish tinge, so the grass in the distance, as I said, will look a little bit bluer. It'll also be a little bit lighter, so the water in that mixture is also automatically lightening it. Had it already dried, I would have picked up some of the blue with some of the green and then dip it in some water and started with that bluer lighter mix. Okay, now going to add a bit more raw umber, a bit more aureolin, and this will also make it a bit warmer too. So our grass is going from this cooler mix to this warmer mix. And you can see how that's giving us a nice feeling of depth into our painting. All right, let me go and dry that. Now let's work on the hills. For the distant hill, I'm going to start with some French ultramarine. Tiny bit of permanent rose, and a little bit of this grass colour. Now, just like with the ground, you can have different coloured hills too. So that's our most distant hill. For this middle distant hill, I'm going to warm it up with some more aureolin and raw umber in the mix. And now for this closer hill, I'll add some aureolin, a little bit of cobalt turquoise, a little bit of raw umber too. You can see how this hill is coming forward, and in part it's also because this is a stronger tone as well, but the colour component is also helping bring this hill forward. I'm just lifting some colour here for the trees I'm going to put in. Let me dry this. So this tree is the one that's furthest away from us. So I'm just painting that with a little bit of blue mixed in with the grass colour. I'll grab some of this brown mixture and use that for the trunk. Now this tree is closer. Just going to lighten this and add some texture to it. There we go. And now this is our closest tree, or will be our closest tree. So I'm going to warm this up more yellow with a little bit more cobalt turquoise as well. I'll add some raw umber. So I've added a bit of burnt sienna. It depends on which tree you're painting. I've also added a little bit more burnt sienna in the trunk here. So we've got a little bit more yellow here than that and that. You can see how this tree looks further away and then this one looks closest. I'm also going to add some shadows. And for a shadow colour, primarily I'm going to use some French ultramarine and a small amount of permanent rose just to create a cool violet. The shadow in the distance will be lighter and slightly bluer, so I'm going to add a little bit of cobalt turquoise to that mix and then dilute it. Dilute it a bit more. So there's that shadow. Then I'll pick up a little bit more of this darker shadow for this middle distant tree. And for the foreground tree, I'll use some of this stronger mix. Now, if this was a proper painting, I'd be also putting in shadows within the tree foliage and maybe on the hills and things like that. But that's not really part of this exercise. Again, the bluer shadow in the distance and the warmer one in the foreground. So this has a little bit more of the permanent rose showing through. This one has less. And this one should be somewhere in the middle. Another effect of atmosphere, which you can use to add depth to your painting, is that as similar objects move into the distance, their colours will be duller. So let me give you an example of how this works. I'll start with a little bit of cobalt blue and I'll dull it with some permanent rose, a little bit of burnt sienna. Now we paint the same object with a brighter blue. So you can see how this house appears to be closer to the viewer, even though we're painting on a flat surface. Now if I pick another colour, let's grab a little bit of this Scarlet Lake. I'm going to dull it with a small amount of cobalt blue, make it a bit stronger. Now if I get some pure Scarlet Lake, so this little demonstration shows us a number of points that we can use when painting our watercolour paintings. Firstly, the duller colours tend to recede. Secondly, the bluer colours will recede and warmer colours will want to come forward. And thirdly, that stronger tones will come forward and lighter tones will move into the distance. Of the three, tones is the most important because it creates the biggest effect. The topics we've been looking at up until now all come under the heading of aerial perspective. And aerial perspective has to do with how the atmosphere modifies the colours and shapes of objects. Now I'm going to spend a little bit of time looking at another form of perspective, which is linear perspective. Linear perspective has to do with lines. Linear perspective also adds depth to your painting. For instance, if you've got a building and that building cuts across the line of a hill, you can see how the building appears in front of that hill. Another key point for linear perspective is that similar objects, as they move into the distance, for instance, let's call this our horizon. If I have a figure here, if I draw the same figure but further away, you can see how the figures get smaller as they move further away towards the horizon. The same would apply to lampposts. So this type of perspective is also used in our paintings when we want to add depth to our subject. There's a lot more to linear perspective. There's been whole books written on the subject. I just wanted to add these 2 points because they are techniques that I use in pretty much every landscape painting that I do. For the sky, some cobalt blue. For the ground, some raw umber. A little bit of cobalt turquoise just to give it a bit of a greenish tinge. I'll test my colours on a scrap piece of paper. I've simplified my reference image because I just want to do a quick little painting that shows you how I use the topics we've covered before on aerial perspective and linear perspective. So for the sky, just going to throw in some clouds up here. Small one there, another one up there. Clean my brush, tap it on the side of my water container a little bit and then come back in, making sure I don't lose all the little white highlights. Some of that blue is already mixed into the hill, so I can pick up my grass colour here, or hill colour, and just come in with that. And that will lighten the tone of this mixture and also cool it down with some of that blue. Then I can keep coming forward. As I come forward, I'm going to add some more paint, raw umber and a little bit of cobalt turquoise in this case. Now I'm going to add some burnt sienna to this just to warm it up even more. These are very small shapes. These cows probably don't even need to paint around them because they're going to be quite dark. Varying the colour. More burnt sienna. Quick brush strokes to leave some untouched paper. Vary the colour some more. We'll add some aureolin and that'll brighten it a bit. Then I'll get my size 8 brush. I've been using a size 12 for all of this. Pick up some burnt sienna. Splatter takes a bit of practice. I suggest you just get a scrap piece of paper if you're not comfortable with it and practice on that first. So you can see how I've gone from a darker tone to a lighter tone, from warmer colours to cooler colours. I'm going to drag some of this paint upwards. Grab some of the greener grass for variety. Just break that sharp edge because there's grass growing all around the bottom of that shed. You can see shine here, but you can't see much shine there. That's telling me the paper is just damp. It's not overloaded with water. So if I get my brush and probably about 90% full of water, I can run that along here. So that just mimics a cattle track or a sheep track in the grass. Let me dry that so that we can start putting in some of the trees and that. I've mainly dried this area here so I can go in and paint these distant trees. So for these distant trees, just some raw umber, cool it down with a little bit of this blue, some cobalt turquoise, a little bit of aureolin, now take out 1/2 to 3/4 of the paint from my brush. If I want the trees to be on the other side of this hill, then I start at that point there. Barely touching the paper. If I want a tree on this side of that edge of the hill, just start it lower. So now I've broken that edge, and that brings this forward. Hint at the odd trunk. Now we'll do the next layer of trees. For this exercise we're going to work on the trees around this shed. So I've got this mixture here, I'll just add more paint to it. So I want it to be a little bit warmer, so more raw umber and stronger in tone. Vary the colour, add a bit of this green. Grab some burnt sienna and a little bit of French ultramarine for the trunks. A little bit of French ultramarine in this, and I'll use it to throw in some of the shadow areas. The light for this painting is coming from this direction. There's another tree here. This is a bit too strong in tone. So I'll just find a lighter mix, add a bit of blue to it. So the main thing is to make these lighter in tone than this here. I'm going to scrape in a few branches. Now paint this bigger tree. It's a fairly light bark tree, so I'm just using some cobalt blue and burnt sienna for it. Just quickly painting in some branches and the trunk. Get a thicker mix of French ultramarine and burnt sienna. Just to vary the colour and the texture of the tree trunk. Now while that's wet I want to go in and paint the foliage. This is a bigger tree, so I'm going to use my size 12 brush. You see the paint's not flowing very much. This tree is the closest tree, so it's going to have the strongest tones and thickest paint, but also it's going to have some of the warmest colours. And I paint this while this tree trunk is still wet, so that some of the colours merge in together. Grab some more French ultramarine. I'm going to add a little bit of permanent rose. And this will act as a shadow underneath some of this foliage area. Now we've got this little pond here. It'll be reflecting some of the sky colour. So I'll just get some of this cobalt blue and I'll add just a hint of burnt sienna to it because it's a muddy pond. And I'll break up the edge with the water. This tree will then have its reflection. Just put that in. This cow will have a little reflection. I know I haven't painted the cow, but I'll just hint at its reflection there. While that's drying, I'm going to run a little bit of this very weak cobalt blue mix over the roof of this shed. Get a little bit of rust colour, so I'll just grab some Scarlet Lake, burnt sienna, a bit of permanent rose, add some cobalt blue to grey it off. It's mainly burnt sienna. That'll do for that for now. While that's sitting there, we'll just paint some shapes that look like hay bales and equipment under here. Just some paint there to hint at gaps through this shed. That was a mixture of cad orange and a little bit of cad yellow. I'm going to throw in some raw sienna here as well. Again, we'll let that sit there. There's some shapes here that could be drums, could be tractor for all we know, we can't tell. So I'll just put some marks in there for that. So this is just the dark shadow within the shed. This is just a very quick little demo. I don't want this video to run for too long. I'm going to grab some French ultramarine, a little bit of Scarlet Lake, just dab some of that in there as well. Scrape in some light branches, not too much. Okay, let me dry this so I can put in the final details. Alright, I'm going to work on the rust on this shed. So I've mixed some rust colour, tapped my brush on the towel to take out most of the paint. The round brush was just a little bit too wet, so I'm breaking up the edge with my fan brush. Just a darker rust colour here, mixed with some French ultramarine and burnt sienna. Break that edge up a bit. Hint at some corrugations lifting. Make this cow a little bit bigger. If I left the cow the original size, it would have looked too small against the tree. Grab some of this cad orange, mix it with some French ultramarine and burnt sienna. That'll read as some gaps within the hay bales. Now let's mix some shadow colour. We'll start with some French ultramarine. A little bit of permanent rose. And then I'll dull it off with some of this Now this is shadow cast onto these hay bales from the roof. Just tint these posts mainly with some of the shadow colour and a little bit of raw umber. This is a shadow cast by the tree trunk and also by some of this foliage. This tree would cast a very weak shadow, weaker than that. Now I'll just get some burnt sienna and French ultramarine. These posts get smaller as they move further away. Some of these little white dots can become seed heads. Just hint at some wire on the fence. Don't make it too thick. Throw in some grasses. I couldn't put this grass in before because the pond water was too wet. Just hint at some little grasses in the distance. Just to break up these flat areas. Throw some grass in along the edge of this fence line. A few other hints at grasses here and there. But don't plant grass all the way across, it just doesn't look right. That can be an old tub holding water. These pillars would have a shadow side. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please give it a like, and if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, please do so. And if you're able, please consider supporting me on Patreon. I look forward to seeing you for the next one.